Now it is my pleasure to introduce U.S. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson. For nearly 30 years, Secretary Carson served as Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Children's Center. Dr. Carson has received dozens of honors and awards in recognition of his achievements, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. In 2017, he was sworn in as the 17th Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Please join me in giving Ben Carson, Secretary Ben Carson, a warm NACo welcome.
And thank you to NACo for bringing us all together for this important legislative conference, and also for what you do, because we could not have a well-functioning nation without the local officials who help run it. I'm delighted to speak with you today about the many ways HUD is working together with you to provide affordable housing. Under the President's leadership, and you're going to hear from the President tomorrow, by the way, he's a very entertaining speaker, I will tell you that. But under his leadership, our nation is really experiencing tremendous economic revitalization. Millions of Americans are being propelled off the welfare list. We have more job openings than we have people looking for jobs. In the fourth quarter of 2019, 74.2% of people entering the job market were from outside of the market. They were people who had dropped out, who had given up, who weren't being counted in statistics. That tells you a lot. And President Trump said in his State of the Union, the best is yet to come. You may not think so because of coronavirus, but this too will pass. And if we stay united and really give no quarter to the voices of division that keep us from working together, there's no limit to what we can accomplish. But we have to stay true to some of the principles that made America that city on the hill in the first place. And one of those bedrock principles is federalism, which means we don't dictate from on high, and the heart and soul of our country is local control. And that means our job at HUD is not to proclaim from on high what county representatives do, but rather to let local leaders lead. One of the biggest challenges in America right now is affordable housing. I think it's fair to say that it's reached, in many places, crisis levels. And we have teachers, and nurses, policemen, firemen who cannot afford to live in the same communities that they serve. That's not only a disservice to them, but a disservice to those communities. And HUD is taking on the affordability challenge by taking action on deregulation. Now, one of the good things about surgeons is they're good at cutting things. And cutting, it's not just about cutting deregulations, it's about, cutting cost so that homes become affordable and lives become improved. And that's why HUD is working so hard with local leaders and public officials from across the country to cut down on those regulations. For single-family home, new constructs, believe it or not, about 25 to 27% of the cost is from regulatory burdens. For multifamily, it's up to 42%. And that is clearly unsustainable. And to change this status quo, last summer, the president, through executive order, established the Council on Eliminating Barriers to Affordable Housing. It's a multi-agency council, which I have the privilege of chairing. And it's engaged with state, local, and tribal leaders across the country to examine the obstacles that are impeding the production of more affordable homes. And the tremendous price tag of burdensome government regulations. What has happened, unfortunately, in so many places, and first of all, don't get me wrong, regulations are necessary. But instead of replacing one regulation with a better regulation as time goes on, we just keep piling regulation on top of regulation. So the distance from 2 points, instead of being a straight line, becomes a labyrinth. And each leg of that labyrinth is costly. And that's how we've gotten into this situation. And, you know, on the whole, federalism means that local leaders fundamentally set the height of the regulatory barriers to affordable housing development in their own communities. And principally, we have three primary tools for driving change. One of them is in our spheres of influence. Each of us can help to tamp down NIMBYism. Not in my backyard-ism. And I understand NIMBYism, and I empathize with NIMBYism, because for most people, the most valuable resource they have is their home. It's the biggest investment they ever make. It is the principal mechanism of wealth accumulation in this country. And the last thing you want is for that generational wealth to be jeopardized. But NIMBYism is based on archaic thinking, because the government no longer comes in with a white horse and a white hat and a bucket of money and builds these gigantic multifamily complexes with no forethought or afterthought or support, which quickly deteriorates and becomes the nidus of crime and poverty and prostitution and everything you can think of. Well, who would want that in their neighborhood? So that's understandable. But here's the rub. Government doesn't do that anymore. Now we're talking about public-private partnerships, mixed income developments that are consistent architecturally and culturally with the areas where they're placed. We're not talking about building a multifamily building in the middle of a block of single-family homes. We're talking about doing things logically that actually make sense, so that not doctors, but nurses and teachers and policemen and firemen can live in the same neighborhoods that they serve. And that enhances, not detracts from that neighborhood. And then secondly, we can persuade local leaders and municipalities to update the way that they do business through outreach and sharing best practices. In this way, NACo's Affordable Housing Toolkit is a superb example of how you're leading the way, helping HUD and other agencies to understand the obstacles and prioritize appropriate partnerships in this space. And that report identifies best practices across many different communities with examples for dealing with things like zoning and land use regulations, incentives for developers, taxes and fees, and other types of concerns. Further, NACo members have participated in several White House councils and roundtables on affordable housing and contributed your invaluable expertise. Thirdly, HUD can change the incentive structure that local leaders and municipalities confront in the housing sector that will align people's interests. To that end, HUD is pursuing regulatory reform to make it easier to develop and rehabilitate housing units. For example, today, I'm delighted to announce that HUD will now allow newly constructed and substantially rehabilitated properties to be refinanced under the Section 223F program without needing to wait for 3 years to obtain a waiver. And HUD's Section 223F program, as you know, insures lenders against loss in case of mortgage defaults by allowing long-term mortgages to be financed with Ginnie Mae mortgage-backed securities. And that makes available loan funds and permits more favorable interest rates. By eliminating the 3-year rule, multifamily properties will no longer need to endure those long and cumbersome waiver processes, which means they can come to HUD sooner and recapitalize through refinancing. The end result is that developers will have more flexibility in development and rehabilitation, and that will help the counties and communities that they serve. Now, HUD is also helping communities succeed through further regulatory reforms on the federal level. The department recently unveiled our improved proposed rule on affirmatively furthering fair housing, or AFFH. The new way of doing it is designed to increase affordable housing options for families while empowering localities to pursue policies to meet each community's unique housing needs. In 2018, we reopened HUD's AFF rule for public comment because the existing rule discouraged rather than encouraged the affordable housing development. And, you know, I don't like to sit around and criticize things that existed before because people did them with good intentions. But when they don't work, you have to examine them and you have to come up with something that really does work. Practicing fair housing isn't a choice, it's the law. But by the existing regulations, they were too top-down, cookie-cutter, Washington-centric. And it's local leaders who know their own communities much better than Washington bureaucrats do. And our new rule reflects that. New improved proposal simplifies compliance, promotes local solutions, focuses on encouraging what everyone needs more of, lower cost, affordable housing. Now, to really help communities grow to their greatest potential, we also need to create opportunities for the communities and for the people who live in them. And that's why we've so embraced the Opportunity Zone initiative. Opportunity zones were created to spur greater private sector investment into the communities that have traditionally been neglected. There's more than 8,700 opportunity zones chosen by the governors, and there are more than 35 million people who live in them. 2.4 million are HUD-assisted individuals. And to maximize the impact of opportunity zones, the White House Council on Opportunity Revitalization was created. I have the privilege of chairing that one too. It's a multi-agency council that can use all of its resources to focus on some of the things that prevent affordable housing from being made and prevent communities from being developed the right way. And the council presented our formal annual report to the president last month, which details 180 different actions by the various agencies that will leverage their strengths. And those actions include the establishment of grant preference points, updated loan qualifications, reduced application fees, and improved eligibility criteria for funding. And through these zones, We're fostering partnerships with people in the community who frequently did not sit down at the table and talk to each other. Community leaders, business leaders, faith-based leaders, public housing advocates, investors, builders, state officials, federal officials, all for the benefits of communities across the country that need it the most. And the conversations I've been a part of have been so encouraging in these early days of this incredible transformation. And America is really a national body. But everywhere you go, it has a local soul. And no matter what the size of the locality that you each represent, it's a selfless and often thankless task that you face, but you're doing it for the betterment of our nation. And I'm grateful that we have such tremendous leaders like the men and women in this room, using your God-given talents with compassion to take care of the people in our spheres of influence, because each one of us has a sphere of influence. And we can do wonderful things in that sphere, including helping the people to realize that we're not each other's enemies, just because you may have a political disagreement. I always say if two people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. And I think everybody is necessary, you know? In order to make this country function the way it should. And you think about how this country came from nothing, a bunch of ragtag militiamen, to the pinnacle of the world in record time. It's because we were all willing to work together and to live by godly principles of loving your fellow man, caring about your neighbor, developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you, having values and principles that govern your life. If we all do that, not only will we have strong counties and strong states, but we will have a strong nation, and we will have a united nation. We will have one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for what you do.